to be with you guys here again this evening. I'm going to share just a couple thoughts, and then I'm going to pray one more time, and we're going to get into the scriptures tonight. I do want to once again extend my thanks to you guys. Thanks to you all for such an incredibly warm welcome. New York is warm. Come on now. Come on. You guys, your warm welcome just has meant the world to me. It's good to get to know so many of you, and good to get to know some of you whose names I had previously heard of for so long. And so it's great to meet you. Special thanks to my friend Jared for the invitation. So grateful. So grateful. I'm glad to be here with you. Thanks to Jason for taking care of so many details. Oh my goodness. Excellent. Just serving with excellence. So grateful for that, and for the worship team. It is something, you know, when there's a team like that is just so quality in terms of what they do, that's really great. But when you add quality and you couple that with, you can tell they've been with Jesus. That's the difference right there. We don't just want good musicians, but we've had people who I believe have spent time in the presence of Jesus, and that's a pretty sweet thing. I also want to say special thanks back to my friends Craig and Caitlin here. You're going to stand up for 1 second. I don't know if people know them. Craig and Caitlin Ritchie are brand new Chi Alpha missionaries to Queens College. Come on now. You guys don't know this, but for a decade, I have been praying for these guys. I didn't pray for them by name because I didn't know who yet Jesus had in mind, but I have been praying that God would bring missionaries, Chi Alpha missionaries, to the university campuses of New York. When about 10 years ago this month, I started serving as the area director for Chi Alpha for the Northeast. So from Virginia up to Maine was the territory I had the privilege of serving, which obviously included New York. And I looked around and I thought, you know what, there are just way too many college students in the state of New York. In fact, if my numbers are right, there are about 1.5 million university students in New York. There are 11 states with fewer residents than there are university students in New York. About 1.5 million students, 11 states have fewer people. And then make that 12 if you include the District of Columbia as well. And these guys, Jesus answered my prayers and our prayers by tapping these folks on the shoulder. They just moved into Queens about how long ago? 6 months. About 6 months they've been in Queens from Texas. Come on now, come on now. You know Jesus has got to be working something good here. And they have 5 more people coming to join their team, is that right? Chi Alpha, in the last few years, we really finally got smart and said, you know what, Jesus sent people out in teams, so we're going to do this the Jesus model. And so they have 5 more people coming by this summer to join them. We also have another team going to Buffalo State because Jesus loves New York, and this is the beginning of something really beautiful. So be sure to welcome them. In Chi Alpha, we are the missions arm of the Assemblies of God to the university campus, and I just want to say that being part of Chi Alpha, we are so incredibly grateful for the Assemblies of God. Us as you and you as us, and we are all together. And we also are incredibly grateful to serve in whatever district or network in which we serve. My credentials are still with the Potomac Ministry Network, and I just love those folks and so grateful for being part of them. And we just always want to be connected into our larger district or network. And so you guys are going to see these guys over the course. We're here with Chi Alpha. We're going to be here to stay. And so I wanted to say hello. A couple of just thoughts. I want to give you one other story from last night that I didn't include. Remember when I was telling you I used to go in and pray in the basement of my building? I would tread a path into the basement, and my great sophisticated prayer vocabulary was something along the lines of, "Dear Jesus, from this basement, like, move up," because that's really all I could come up with. And then I mentioned to you that the first young woman who gave her life to Christ that year, young woman, Hawaiian gal named Julie, I didn't realize, I didn't mention this last night, but I always love this part of the story. About a year after all that happened, all of a sudden it occurred to me, one night, Julie's room, true story, Julie's room was directly above the basement where I used to pray. So when I was praying, like, move up, he did, right through Julie's room. It was just amazing. It took me a year to figure that one out, and I just thought, you know what, Lord, you are so funny. You are so funny. And it's like you just want to say, you know what, I hear your prayers. It was a funny little way for him to answer that. But I want us to be encouraged that he hears our prayers. He hears our prayers. So Julie was the first young woman or student that year who'd given her life to the Lord. The first person I ever led to the Lord in my life was Julie. And then the first person she led to the Lord was Wendy, who I also mentioned at the end of the semester giving her life to the Lord. I just saw Wendy. She's a pharmacist in San Diego. I spent the night with her. I was traveling through San Diego in September, spent the night, got a chance to catch up. Wendy takes leave from her work as a pharmacist whenever there's been a natural disaster, and she takes supplies and relief in Jesus' name. She's been loving Jesus. She's got one of the most hungry hearts for the presence of God of anybody I know. It's just fantastic. And this has been over 25 years since she said yes to Jesus, about the same time since Julie said yes. Julie is married. She's got 2 kids that she's raising in the faith now. Her children love Jesus. And this is the kind of thing that we just, this is the point, right? This is not just about, okay, well, that's great. There was a day she prayed a prayer, but over 2 decades later, Julie's raising her kids in the Lord. Over 2 decades later, Wendy is still serving in Jesus' name any opportunity she gets. And that's the kind of thing that we love to see. Our desire is for long-term fruit. We recognize people make choices. We can't make their choices, but our desire and what we labor for, what we trust God for, is the long-term fruit. Because our desire is to see people become lifelong disciples of Jesus. There's a story I heard one time about a football team, and they were, getting ready, high school football team getting ready for practices, or in practices getting ready for the season to start, for the beginning of school. And, they're doing their whole thing. They go through 2-a-days kind of thing. And then at the end of the practice season, just before school starts, but just before the season starts, the coach decides to have all the players and all the parents come over for like a cookout and just like a big party just to celebrate the fact that practice season officially is over and now we're into the playing season. And there was a parent who said to the coach, he said, "Hey coach, how are things looking? What do you think? Are we going to be successful?" And the coach looked back at the parent and said, "I won't know for 20 years. And the parent said, I don't understand, are we going to win games?" And the coach said, "My purpose is not just to win games. My purpose is to build men. And I'll know in 20 years when they are fathers and when they are community members, when they are church members, that's when I'll know if we've been successful during this practice season." Friends, that's a little bit of what we're going to get into tonight. That's our desire. I think that's your desire. I think that's why you're here this weekend. And so I'd like to pray, and then we'll jump in and pray with me, would you? Father, your word says that the multitudes of heaven worship you. And tonight, God, both in the practical aspect of our singing and our worship, but then also in our hearts as we engage you during the word. Lord, I pray, we're getting a new mic here, right in the middle of prayer. Lord, I pray that you would strengthen us, strengthen our minds, strengthen our hearts, strengthen our bodies, so that we can receive everything you have for us tonight. Lord, I pray we wouldn't miss a thing. Lord, I pray that we would be able to be strengthened in your presence, our ears would be attuned to your voice, and that we would be attentive to your presence tonight. And we pray this in the name of Jesus. And everyone said, Amen. 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 All right, turn to your neighbor and say hello. Hello. And talk amongst yourselves. All right. Hey. Oh, there we go. All right. Okay. When I was 10 years old, I joined a softball team. First season I ever played softball. I played organized softball in the suburb of Los Angeles that I grew up in. Our team was an expansion team. We were called the Four Seasons because that was the name of a sporting goods shop that sponsored us. Our team, I was so excited to play. I just had this thing. I loved the competition of sports. Even at 10 years old, I loved to play. And our little team, being a first-year team, was not very good. We went 0-20. 0-20. We lost every stinking game of the entire season. I mean, you can imagine a new team coming in, we're raw, we're kind of young and everything, but game 1 you lose, game 2 you lose, game 3 you lose, game 4 you lose, game 5 you lose. We're only a quarter of the way through our losing season, right? We're good as I do that. We lost 20 games in a row. We wrap up, so that was my year when I was 10 years old. We wrap up, I'm still on the same team going into the next year. And the next, and there's just hope, right? There's just hope. You're thinking maybe this year we're better. Maybe this year there's another new team who's worse than we are. I mean, you're just trying to come up with anything. And we got into the second season, we lost our first game, and we lost our second game, and we lost our third game. And I remember, I think it was our fourth game, we're coming toward the end of the game, and actually we weren't very far behind. At this point, so as I said, it's my second year. My cousin, who's 1 year younger than I was also on my team. She'd been recruited to my team. My cousin was not as athletically gifted, perhaps, if I can say it that way. I mean, she was on the team and it was great, but it just really wasn't as much her thing. We just kind of did it as a family. My family is Greek. I didn't mention that before. I don't look Greek, but I have the appetite and the attitude of a Greek. My mom's side of the family is full Greek, which means everything we did was together. And has anybody seen the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding? Then you met my Big Fat Greek family. I'm not even kidding. I went to see the movie with my Greek family. We walked out, and my aunt said, "It's like watching home movies." I mean, it was just stunning. The only thing we didn't do was the Windex. That was just not we didn't do the Windex, and we didn't roast the lamb in front of the house. Okay, you know what I'm saying, right? But I mean, so in our family, you just do everything together. My cousin and I were only 1 year apart. Her name is Christina. She and I were more like sisters than cousins. We were absolutely best friends. During the summers, one of us was always spending the night at the other's house. We didn't live very far from each other. And in the big Fat Greek families, everybody's up in each other's grills, you know what I mean? Like I said, cousins were more like siblings. My aunts and uncles were more like parents, which means they could discipline us. You couldn't get away with anything. But my cousin Christina is on my team, and it's the fourth game of our second season. And at this point, we are actually not too far behind. We're maybe only 1 or 2 runs down. And it's, coming toward the end of the game, but you ever been, I don't know if you've done sports or something like that, when you start to feel a little bit of a rally, you kind of start to feel a little bit of a shift in the momentum. We started to feel a shift in the momentum. Something was going on. We must have come up with some runs or something. We started to feel the shift. And I can still remember the scene. I can actually, literally in my head, I can see it. Our team was up. We were in the third base dugout, and I'm watching it, and my cousin got on base. At this point, we are maybe 1 run down. It is the last inning. We've got 2 outs. And then my cousin, I think she got walked or something, and now she is on first base. So now the next person goes up to hit. And I remember watching this, and you have that, your heart is beating, and everything just feels tight, because it's could this be the one W we get in 2 seasons, right? And so we're watching, and the person who was the person on our team who was at bat, she hit the ball, and it was a fly ball to right field. And as she hit the ball, my cousin thought, this is my chance. And she starts running from first base to second base. And I can still see her in my mind running, chugging along from first base to second base. But any of you who know baseball or softball know that when that ball was a fly ball and the right fielder caught it, and actually I think there was 1 out. The right fielder caught it, and all the right fielder had to do was send it back to first base for a double play. And if she did that, it was over. My cousin, my sweet cousin, who was so excited to get her chance to run to second base, I can still see her running, and I start screaming, and everybody's screaming, and I feel like everything went into slow motion. Go back! Like that kind of thing. And we're all trying to wave her back, to go back, because if she goes and doesn't get back to first base, she's gonna be out. Well, sure enough, she's still chugging along on her way to second, really quite pleased with herself. Right fielder catches the ball, tosses an easy throw to first base, double play, done, we're out. Our closest opportunity for victory, right there, dreams shattered. We were the least successful team in the history of ever. Now, we weren't the only unsuccessful team in the history of ever. I mean, there were probably other teams that went 0 and whatever, but you can't go worse than 0 and whatever. You know what I mean? Nobody got more losses in a season than all losses, you know. Fast forward 2 years, I ended my 12th year, 12-year-old year. I was on a same softball team, but I was invited onto another team that played in our city that was invited into kind of a series tournament. So I'm invited on that team. We start to play and we win, and then we win, and then we win, and then we go to all over Southern California. We keep winning. Next thing you know, we are invited to play the regionals in Phoenix, Arizona, and we won. Next thing you know, we're invited to the World Series of Girls Softball in Kalamazoo, Michigan, to play in the championship series, and we won. And we won. Are you kidding me? We went 0 and a million. I went from 0 and a million to a team that won the World Series of Girls Softball. It was just like, it was amazing, it was stunning. And here's the thing, in that first year, if our measure of success was simply a win, then it was a completely unsuccessful season. But you know what happened to me during that season? And I think it was so interesting that it happened to me, my cousin, who was my very best friend and more like a sister to me. That person who went chugging along, I wanted to be so angry. You know what I mean? I wanted to be like, you made us lose the whole thing. But because I was so committed to my cousin in relationship, I was disappointed. But I had to say, you know what? My relationship with you, my love for you, far outweighs my desire to be successful. My relationship with you far outweighs my desire to get a W, to get a win. It was such an interesting contrast in those couple of years. I learned how to lose with grace. I learned how to lose in a way that allowed for relationship to still flourish. I learned how to love well. I learned how to honor relationship. And 2 years later, I learned how to win with grace. Because we had lost so many stinking games, it really made winning all the sweeter. But it also made winning all the gentler. Because I knew what it was like to lose. We learned to win, we learned to lose. It was one of the most formative seasons of my life, and I view those 2 seasons as totally successful. If something else was the measure of my success, I may not have been able to. But I learned to define success in a unique way that time. And I want to talk about that for a little bit tonight, a little bit more. I want to talk about how we define and maybe redefine success. I'll be honest with you, I would rather have this conversation in a one-on-one or in a small group. And I'll tell you why. I am a little bit nervous about being misinterpreted in some of the things I'm going to say over the course of time, because what I'm not talking about is, when I talk about redefining success, I'm not talking about using it as an excuse for unfruitfulness. I have been in a number of churches, and maybe you guys have too. I've been in a number of churches where I've gone, and quite honestly, they were really unhealthy. It was a good thing I brought someone when I went to speak, because it, added a whole other person in the room, because there weren't very many people in the room, and, perhaps their view of what a good service was is, okay, well, we sang, and someone really brought the word, and then we closed it, and that was it, and, there was no impact, no inspiration to go and touch anything going on in the community, quite frankly, and I'm careful to say this, but there are some places I think I've been, and maybe you have too, where if the church closed, I agreed to say that maybe not a lot of people in the community would notice. So I'm not talking about an excuse for unfaithfulness, and I've seen that in our own ministry as well. One of the challenges we've had in Chi Alpha is once somebody's placed on campus, sometimes people have been placed on campus as campus missionaries who didn't, like Claude was saying, maybe they were called, but they were not prepared. Maybe they were not qualified. And they got onto campus and they spent year after year after year struggling. They have an entire campus of people who don't know Jesus, and they can't grow their group more than a couple. And then when we challenge that, their immediate response is, you don't know how hard my campus is. Well, yeah, but the guy up the street has a campus just like yours, and they're doing pretty well. But maybe they were prepared, maybe they were qualified. So I've seen this, and friends, I don't personally want to be a part of a maintenance ministry. I didn't take the role that I'm currently in just so we can maintain and do the same old thing. I really do want to see God move. I really do want to see people come to faith. I really do want to see our ministry grow and develop. I really do. I understand and I agree absolutely with what Claude was saying. God is the one who has to do the growing in that. But I really want to do, what I want to do is I want to have a ministry that's healthy enough that God can actually grow it, and a healthy thing can reproduce a healthy thing. And I think questions like these kinds of considerations, I think, are really worth our reflection. So I hope that tonight this would be one of those touch points of consideration, a touch point that may help us with our own self-awareness or our own contextual awareness. How do you define success? How do you define success? And let me maybe take it another step forward. Do you feel successful in your ministry? Do you think you're successful? Do you feel successful? Why or why not? I think sometimes the church's view today, and this is one of those things where I wish we were like one-on-one sitting over coffee. Sometimes I wonder if our view in the church today of what is successful may not be fully in alignment with the Father's heart. I really do wonder that. This is a phenomenal time to be a part of the church. We have more access to what's going on around the world than any other time. I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, we get that in the news. I mean, I can't. You go to one of your news apps and you've got big picture news and you've got the tiniest little news story all from all around the world. It's just literally at our fingertips. But it's the same thing in terms of our access into what's going on around the church. We have more access to some of the most brilliant and amazing preachers and leaders and pastors and on. I mean, they're on YouTube, they're on podcasts. We've got everything. We're getting there. We're streaming their stuff. We have all of this stuff that is absolutely available to us. And I wonder if sometimes we don't look at that and think, okay, well, that's what success looks like. I wonder if we don't sometimes look at that and think, okay, well, I've got to preach like that to be successful. I've got to lead like that to be successful. I've got to be able to pray like that to be successful. I've got to be able to have a ministry that looks like that in order to be successful. And I think sometimes we jump over. I mean, maybe that pastor or that leader, he or she maybe they spent 45 years laboring to get to that place, and we just see it in the palm of our hands. We may assume that that's the standard of success, and then we may wonder why our seemingly fruitless efforts, if they're actually making a difference. In our ministry, I served for 10 years on a campus in California, a little town called Chico, California. You may have heard of it, heard about any of the fires that happened in Northern California a couple weeks ago. Paradise, California, tragic, I mean, it's just gone. The next town over is Chico. I spent 10 years there. And serving on a university campus. It was a mid-sized school, maybe 17,000 students of a state school. And our framework for our ministry included something that we called Reach, Restore, Raise Up, and Release. It's kind of like the pipeline, the framework that Claude was talking about today. We wanted a sense, like when we're thinking, if we're going to reach out to students, what are we going to do with them? And the framework that we kind of used for our internal language was, we want to see students reached for the gospel. Students just like me, students who had perhaps no contact with the gospel before, or maybe they did. Maybe they were raised in church and they were coming onto campus trying to figure out what it is I believe now as a young adult, and we wanted to see those students as well reached. And then we would say we want to see them restored. We want to see them really really understand what it is we believe and what it is they were taking on in terms of following Jesus. It was the discipleship process and helping them understand what are the foundations of our faith, what are the truths of the Bible that we really want them to understand. So we wanted to see them reached, restored, raised up. That was the leadership training process. We thought, you know what? We want to see these young men and women raised up in leadership. We want to see them trained and equipped to reach their friends, and then they would be released back onto the campus to be an effective witness for Christ, or they would be released into the marketplace or released into the world as world missionaries. That was our hope. That was our desire. That was our view, that if we could stay close to that, then we would be able to fulfill our mission. It was a general track that I think was pretty helpful and pretty healthy in a lot of ways, but there are times, even with our great framework and even with our process that we want to see people walk through, that not everything goes according to plan. How many of you guys have had a time when not everything goes according to plan? I mean, what you have written down and what you have up on the PowerPoint slides, man, that is good. How many of you know that not everybody goes according to our plan? I mean, as a whole, that's what we were hoping for. But I do remember it was my 10th year in Chico, and I was at this point directing our ministry, and I was working with a young woman named Kay in our ministry. She had given her life to the Lord, and just had come from a really, really rough background. And but she was growing, and she was committed, and she was part of us, and everything like that. And I remember coming back from one of our, I think it was maybe a long weekend or something, and I got a phone call from Kay. Now, what I'm about to say, I don't say often, and I don't say it to sound all dramatic, but Kay calls me and she says, Stephanie, I just have something to tell you. She said, I really just kind of went off the edge over this break, and I was on my way home, back to Chico, back to school, and she said, and I had decided to start snorting coke again, and I mean, she just tells me this, and I say that, some of you are looking at me like, I don't say that often, you know what I mean? Like, when people kind of backslide, they don't usually say, oh, and I started doing coke again, you know, but in this particular case, she did. She said she had gotten high as a kite, completely just on a bender with coke, and she said she's taking the train back to our town, and she said, Stephanie, I'm sitting there, I'm completely jacked up from the coke, and she said, and Jesus came and stood next to me. And she said, I told him, go away, I don't want you. And then she said, he kept standing there. And I told him again, go away, I don't want you. And she said, Stephanie, he wouldn't leave. She's sitting in a little seat on the train, jacked up. Jesus comes and stands next to her. She's trying to tell him to leave, and he won't go away. And on that train, once again in her heart, she surrendered and said, okay, you're not going away. Okay, I'll give my life back to you. She comes back to school, to Chico, calls me and tells me the story, and I am just stunned. Of course, you know, I'm just like, that's not what I thought she was calling about, of course. I hang up the phone and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, like, what do you do with that, right? What do you do with that? I was so stunned, of course, grateful to hear that she had surrendered her heart, bowed her knee once again to Jesus. But I remember thinking, you know, there's that little part of you that just thinks, oh my goodness, like, what happened? Like she was reached, she was going through the restoration, we're trying to raise her up to release her, you know what I mean? Like, this didn't fit in my framework. And I remember very clearly the Lord spoke to me. And I know this was the Lord because I would have never come up with this thought myself. Now, you're free to judge me and say, you know, I don't think that was the Lord. But I feel pretty confident that I heard the voice of the Lord speak to me. And he said, Stephanie, sometimes it's a victory just getting them back to ground zero. And I knew that was the Lord because I would have never come up with that myself. Because that didn't fit my framework of, okay, she's going to reach, restore, raise up, release. Okay, we got to, you know what I mean? Like, I had big plans for a successful process. Sometimes it's a victory just to get them back up to ground zero. Somewhere out of that process, Luke 15 came to me, and we're going to look at this for a moment. Luke 15, it's just a very interesting passage. There's some thoughts in here that I'm not sure I had ever really considered before in Luke 15. And the context of it is Jesus is you know, hanging out with sinners. He's in relationship with sinners, and the Pharisees did not see Jesus' relationship with sinners as successful ministry. You know what I mean? Which is just crazy. And Jesus helped us to never have a Pharisaical heart. But the Pharisees weren't that impressed with Jesus' ministry. They didn't find it all that successful. And the context of this passage that we'll see and everything is ultimately the point is that God searches for, welcomes, and forgives the sinner. I think what Jesus was trying to say in this passage was to the Pharisees that they were the sinners, you know? But the overall context is that God restores the sinner. But I want to take a look at something here that I had never really noticed before. It's starting in verse 4. It says, this is the parable of the lost sheep. It goes to the lost coin and then the lost son. Verse 4 says, Jesus says, what man of you, having 100 sheep, if he's lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost. Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Let's go into the parable of the lost coin. Or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and diligently seek until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost." Just so I tell you that there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. It's interesting to me when I read through these passages in Luke 15. I gotta be honest, they kind of press a little bit of they kind of press against something. They go against the grain in something in me. These passages in Luke 15 doesn't show any net gain. If you think about it, you got 100 sheep, one gets lost, the shepherd leaves the 99, goes and searches for the one that's lost, brings it back, you're back to 100 sheep. You got 10 coins. One is lost. The lady goes all through her house, lights the lamp because it's probably dark in there, and she's sweeping and sweeping, searching and searching and searching for the lost coin. If we were to go on in Luke 15, we'd see that the father had 2 sons. One of the sons leaves, spends all of his inheritance, comes back. The father is longing, hoping for the son to come back, enough to notice that he's coming back and runs out after him, comes back, and now the father has his 2 sons again. There's a little something that just presses against my grain because I like the net gain. I would have been much more happy if the woman who had lost the coin went back and searched for it and found 2 coins. You know what I mean? Like, hey, it's a good day. I had 10, then I lost 1, and now I have 11, you know? I mean, honestly, it's interesting because each one about these is finding what had gotten lost, not getting more, and yet they were still celebrated. They were still celebrated. Somehow, they could celebrate the work. And I wonder if somehow in the process, part of our defining success or redefining success is to genuinely celebrate the work of God, even if it doesn't necessarily go according to our plan. Again, I don't want to be about maintaining. I really want more people who don't know Jesus. I want the church to be larger, bigger. You know what I mean? I really do. I genuinely want that. But I wonder, let me just say it this way. I feel like I'm a healthier leader because I've learned how to celebrate the work of God along the way. Even if it doesn't, I don't fully see the things I want to see. I've had to redefine success in some ways so that I can celebrate the work of God. I think sometimes, friends, there are seasons when the hard work that you do doesn't seem to bring the increase. I think there will be seasons like that. And I think exactly in those seasons, we still need to be celebrating what God is doing. Have you ever felt like you were going backwards in ministry? I remember when I first became the Chi Alpha director, which is what Jared is here in New York. I was in the Potomac Ministry Network. When I got there, we had 17 groups around the network that were called Chi Alpha. Over the course of the next few years, I successfully grew us to 12. But you know what? The 17 groups that we had when I first got there and when a lot of us really put our shoulder to this weren't very healthy. I mean, some of them were. I don't mean to disparage them all, but some of them just really weren't very healthy. And over the course of time, as we got healthier, and some groups, like, that's not really a healthy group, let's just not continue that one. Over the course of time, we saw more students coming to faith in Jesus. We saw more students going through leadership training. We saw more students signing up to go on mission trips. We had students who would sign up. They would line up hours before we would start taking sign-ups on one of our campuses at University of Virginia. Students would sign up hours in advance. They'd bring their homework. They'd spend hours and hours waiting until the time started when they could sign up for mission trips. And within moments, all the mission trip spots were full. Like, we can't take any more. We've got 200 people going on mission trips. We can't take any more. We just don't have the capacity. We saw more students coming to our retreats. We saw more students saying, when I graduate, I'm going to give a year of ministry, I'm going to give a year of service, and I'm going to pray about a lifetime of service. Before I go to grad school, before I get a mortgage, before I start my Fortune 500 career, I'm going to go give it a year of service to missions. We saw more and more and more, even as we shrunk in number. It was the craziest thing I'd ever seen. And we could stop and we could celebrate the work of God. What is your definition of success? And what might that mean for your spiritual health and your longevity? What might it mean for you to be able to do this thing for a long, long time if we perhaps redefine success so we can celebrate the work of God along the way? and rejoice, even if all it seems to be is we got them back to ground zero. Does that make sense? This will probably be familiar to a lot of you, but I tend to look at success as the marriage of faithfulness and fruitfulness. That's not deep, heavy revelation. Probably a lot of you have heard that. It's like one bird with two wings. You can't fly really with one without the other. But I have seen over time, I've seen some people, when you ask them about things, what does it mean to be successful, or how do you know that things are working in your church, their immediate response is about their faithfulness. Well, we're just being faithful to the Lord. And let me just say, that is beautiful. Be faithful to the Lord. And we'll talk about that for a minute. But a lot of times, it's just a matter of being faithful to the Lord. And well, we're not really growing or anything like that, but we're faithful. And then there are other folks who may be on the other side, and it's all about the fruit, and there's not so much about the faithfulness. Like, if you have faithfulness without fruitfulness, then you got to wonder, are we being good stewards of what God has given us? If we have faithfulness without fruitfulness, we just have to wonder, like Claude was saying, like, are we really well placed? Are we really well prepared? Are we ready for this work? If we have faithfulness but no fruitfulness, and on the other hand, if we have fruitfulness with no faithfulness, we got to wonder, are we just allowing the ends to justify the means? If we're about fruitfulness with no faithfulness, are we just getting to the place where we're like, okay, whatever we do is going to be fine because, we're going to win more souls, we're going to win more souls, and it doesn't matter how we do what we do. And at that point, we're vulnerable to losing our integrity. It's almost like we're saying who we are doesn't matter as long as we do the work. And I have to believe that Jesus wants both. He wants us to be deeply, deeply faithful. And I do think he wants us to be fruitful. One of the ways I really try to process that in my own life, I've heard a lot of people pray these amazing prayers. My prayers don't sometimes feel that amazing. I have a very simple prayer that I pray all the time. Dear Jesus, make me useful in your kingdom. I'm not asking for the world, I'm just asking to be useful. And if you want to use me in the smallest thing to advance your kingdom, so be it. And if you want to use me in something big to advance your kingdom, so be it. Just make me useful. Help me to be useful to you and to your kingdom. Big or small. So we're going to wrap up in a moment, but I want to ask you guys a few questions, or I'll bring up a couple things, because I think there's some things that muddy the water, that don't allow us to see a healthy, clear view of what success is. And I want to present about a half a dozen to you. And if these sound like you, there's going to be an opportunity to pray in a few moments. What could possibly muddy the water could be a fear of failure. Do you perhaps work in an unhealthy environment where failure is really reviled? If you do, then that will skew your view of what is healthy success. If it's a matter of you don't feel like you can try something or experiment with something or make a mistake because it will be viewed as failure and somehow failure is viewed as sin, that will skew your view of healthy success. How about your own unhealthy definition of success? It was interesting when I was in that campus in Chico. For the first 4 years, I served under an amazing, amazing director. He was kind of the full package. This was a guy who was the most pure evangelist I'd ever seen. I mean, people just kept getting saved everywhere he went. It seemed like that. Plus, he had this strong prophetic gifting. I would see him minister at different churches, and he'd be like, okay, you're a lady with the purple polka dotted thing, and the Lord wanted to say this to you, and your last name is this, and they'd be like, yes, you know what I mean? It was just amazing. It was extraordinary. I mean, he was the kind of guy, I'm pretty sure he smiled when he sleeps, He had just exuded the joy of the Lord, right? And I ended up being I'm a little more of an Eeyore compared to him, And I remember when he left, I served under his leadership for 4 years, and I mean, he had amazingly big shoes to fill, and it was a little bit intimidating, but I remember somewhere in there, early on in the process, the Lord whispered to my heart and said, the guy's name is Sean Smith. Some of you guys, I don't know, Craig, did Sean ever speak at your guys'? Yes. Okay, someone may have heard. Okay, yeah. It's Sean Smith, phenomenal man of God. He had big shoes to fill. But I remember in the transition, when he was leaving, I remember the Lord whispered to me and said, Stefanie, if I wanted the ministry to continue to look at, for the next season, to continue to be under Sean's leadership, I wouldn't have moved Sean on. Like, I wanted the ministry under your leadership now. So my view of success had to change because which was great. I no longer was trying to run the ministry based on the last director. I could let God work through me. And I'm a little bit different in my giftings. I'm a little bit different in my skills. And it was the right fit for the right time for that place in our ministry. There was something really liberating about not trying to define success based on how it compared to Sean. That was very, very liberating for me. So we have fear of failure, unhealthy definition of success, unreasonable expectations of self. Man, that's a big one. This one causes exhaustion. Oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do more, I've got to more. It can be so exhausting. And we have enough exhausted leaders in the church. We have enough pastors and leaders who are depressed. You know what I mean? I'm not making light of legitimate issues, but I'm saying let's not add to it. I think there's some inherent challenges in ministry. I don't think we need to make them harder, make ministry harder by making it harder on ourselves in that way. My friends, when I served on campus at Georgetown for many years, and my Jesuit friends there would always say the greatest thing, they would always say, be gentle with yourself. Be gentle with yourself. Let's not have such unreasonable expectations. And so fear of failure, unhealthy definition of success, unreasonable expectations of self, excuses for fruitlessness. I don't know that that's as much the case for in this room because you're here as learners. I don't see a lot of excuses. If you're here to learn, and if you're here to get better at what you do, there's not a lot of excuses for fruitlessness in the room then, which is very encouraging. I do think sometimes we allow, though, people to fill positions simply because they're willing, kind of along the lines of what Claude was saying, and I think sometimes this is where self-awareness matters. So when I was in Chico, I decided at one point I wanted to learn how to play the guitar. And so I learned maybe 6 or 8 chords, and I had always wanted to learn to play the guitar. I'm amazed. I see all you guys who are like raised in the church, and you've been like playing the piano since you were 2 and everything, and you know what I mean, like the presence of the Lord comes down, and it's just amazing. And I worked hard to be able to get 6 or 8 chords. I worked really hard, but I got my 6 or 8 chord. I learned my 3 songs. I decided to lead worship one time in my small group, and so I went there and I led worship in my small group, and I was pretty pleased because I did it, man. I was just like, oh, that was awesome, right? And then I went and I talked to a friend of mine who was in my small group, and she said, Stephanie, please don't ever do that again. True story. Please don't ever do that again. She said, and I quote, you distract us from the presence of God more than bring us into the presence of God. True story. She absolutely did. She did. And, I learned, that proverb that says, wounds from a friend can be trusted. I learned the truth that wounds from a friend can be trusted. Because here's the deal. I shouldn't be singing. Jesus didn't make me to sing. You know what I mean? Maybe I could pull out 6 chords on my guitar. Jesus did not make me to sing. Even when I was a kid and I asked my mom if I could sing, she said no. Because moms, you think moms are supposed to lie to you, right? You know what I'm saying? No, my mom's a truth teller. She said, no, you can't sing. And I was trying to operate outside of my gifting because I was willing. Sometimes we have excuses for fruitlessness, and we need the community to help us make sense of what that means. Another reality I'm aware of is that some of you folks may serve under the leadership of someone who may have a different definition of success than you do. And as a staff member or volunteer leader under their leadership, you may not always have the liberty to say, well, this is my definition of success. Sometimes you just learn to honor the leadership and find ways to be successful, find ways to be fruitful in your ministry in a place that still honors your leaders. And then sometimes what muddies the definition is we just don't feel prepared. I'm going to give you a last couple thoughts here as we wrap up tonight. Some things that I do think godly success looks like. You guys remember toward the story, I'm thinking about the time in John. It was shortly after Jesus healed Lazarus, raised him from the dead. It was so interesting because when you look at the last several chapters of John, it says that there was a time when Jesus healed Lazarus, and then there was kind of caused an upheaval, if you guys remember. And there's a point, I think it's toward the end of John 11, where it says that Jesus, as he was getting closer to the last days of his life, I think it was down to the last week of his life, it says that he took his disciples away with him to a place called Ephraim. And they stayed there. And they stayed there during the last part of his life. Again, I believe it was down to the last week or so. Now, if I'm trying to write the story and I'm thinking Jesus has like a week left, What are you going to do with that last week? And you're thinking, man, I'm just going to go out. We're going to tell everybody. We're going to heal everybody. We're going to do all the miracles. Hashtag all the miracles. We're going to do all the things, you know. I'm thinking, this is our last shot. Jesus actually did something really different. Instead of going out, instead of healing more, instead of doing more and more, he actually took his disciples and said, you know what? The best thing I can do is invest in these 12 men in these last days of my life. And if you go through and read in those chapters of John, starting John chapter 13, when we have, when Jesus washes their feet and they have the Lord's Supper. John chapter 14, he introduces the Holy Spirit. John chapter 15, he's talking about abiding in Christ. John chapter 16, the persecution. John chapter 17, unity. All of those chapters, if you read through, if you have the words of Jesus in red, it's just red. It's all of these words of Jesus. Some of the greatest teaching, some of the greatest instruction of Jesus' life came during those last few days when we might think that in order to be successful before he goes to the cross, he's got to be out there. And instead, Jesus said, nope, I'm going to take these 12. I'm going to invest everything I can in them because they're going to do even greater things than I've done. It's interesting to me that when he did that, he took them to Ephraim. Ephraim means doubly fruitful. And I just got to wonder if the Lord wasn't smiling when he scripted that into the pages of the Bible. Where our natural thought may be, go out there and tell everything. He said, I'm going to have my son invest into these 12 men, and it will be a place where he is doubly fruitful. Maybe we need a redefinition of what it means to be making disciples in a place of doubly fruitful. Two other thoughts I have. I heard this from a guy who said something once. If we're thinking about what does it mean to redefine success, godly success in our role as ministers, there are far too many people, and I put myself in this at times, there are far too many people in the church who process the church like this. Feed me. Feed me. Feed me a lot. That's okay. You can feed me a lot because it will fall on the napkin and it won't get on my clothes. Feed me. And maybe the change, maybe part of what our success, our fruitfulness and faithfulness includes, is helping people go from here to here. To go from, can you feed me, to how can I serve? How can I serve when I walk out these doors? How can I serve when I'm in my community? How can I serve when I'm on campus? How can I serve my family? Maybe that is a part of the measure of the success that God can give us grace for. It's helping folks go from here to here. And the last thought, and then we're going to pray in smaller groups. I find myself often praying the words of John 17:4. Again, this is all during that time of the doubly fruitful, the time in Ephraim. Jesus said, I'm reading out of NIV, but I think we put it up in ESV there. I have brought you glory on earth by completing the work you gave me to do. Interesting that he said that. Jesus knew his disciples were about to betray him. He hadn't gone to the cross yet. But somehow in there, he could say to the Father, I brought you glory on earth by completing the work you gave me to do. I don't know exactly what that looks like for you. I don't know exactly fully yet what that looks like for me, but this is my consistent prayer. God, let me bring you glory on earth by completing the work that you gave me to do. If I have an unhealthy view of success, I'm going to get those mixed up. And it's going to cut in. It's going to taint the genuine work of God through my life if I'm unhealthy in how I view success. If it's just a matter of I've got to keep up with that leader. If it's a matter of I've got to keep all the plates spinning. If it's a matter of I've got to feel better about myself if I can be successful. Any of those things are just going to mess it up. I've been trusting the Holy Spirit to speak to you guys just in your own way. Some of you guys may feel like, I feel like I'm really healthy in this area. And if that's what you're feeling, if you feel tonight, like, I just feel like I'm really in a healthy place, I feel like God has helped me, then I'm just going to ask you to spend some time worshiping, praying for your friends. We're going to pray in smaller groups for the next few minutes. I think Jared's going to come and lead us, or he's just going to come and play softly. What I'm going to ask you guys to do here for the next few minutes, because a lot of these things are done in community, I'm going to ask you to get in groups. 2, 3, or 4. I don't want to legislate it, but, preferably not alone and preferably not too big of a group. So I know maybe some groups have come here, maybe some couples have come here if you want to pray together, or if you want to break up, whatever. But just in the context of community, could you share with that community? Because I'm really wrestling with this. I feel like maybe I'm not quite prepared. And it's hard to keep up with the expectation I have of myself of being successful, and I don't feel prepared. Maybe you can say, I just feel like I'm trying to live up to somebody else's view of success. And I need God to free me of that. Even if you can't necessarily be free from the actual practical aspect, if you really do serve another leader their vision is different. We do honor our leadership. But there's an internal freedom that has to come. Does that make sense? So I'm going to pray for you guys. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and be bold. Pray for one another. Share with one another. Again, if you feel like, man, I'm feeling good, then share with them. Share with your group. I'm feeling really good about this, but I'm still going to pray with you guys. And then the worship team's going to come back, and we're going to